It really strikes me as strange that you never hear of babies being abused. I mean, it does happen sometimes, and it's really awful and terrible and appalling when it does happen. When a parent or whoever would actually beat or physically harm their baby, when our human instincts are to be as protective of babies as possible. But when a baby comes home, it's like people love the infant. They just think it's the greatest thing in the world. They treat it with so much kindness and care for it and keep it safe and are so protective of it. But we abuse children, and the same human being that will treat with such care will then abuse not much longer later. It almost doesn't make any sense. Like, we look at a baby that comes into the world as this brand new opportunity, like a do-over or something, and yet within a few years we'll completely abuse, harm that child, beat it, scream at it, cuss at it, destroy its self-esteem, do everything we can to dominate, manipulate, and control that child. And it's unbelievably common. Child abuse, I think this is one of the most important live streams I've done, because child abuse is probably the worst thing that we do as a species, as human beings. And this is such an important topic, and we don't like to talk about it. It's one of those taboo topics that we like to keep hush-hush, but it's so important to get this stuff out there and to talk honestly and brutally about child abuse, about its causes, about its effects, and what we can do to stop it, especially. So this is my third live stream I've done on mental health, and I think this might be the most important one. So we talked previously about anxiety, and then last week we talked about manipulators and narcissists and, being in abusive relationships. So this week we're going to talk about the causes, effects of child abuse, why it's so damaging to a human being to be abused as a child, what it does to their nervous systems, why they have difficult times in adulthood. So again, my premise here, and I have a lot of material. If you go back to a previous video that I made, I linked all my sources, or I didn't link them, I showed you all the books that I've gotten this. So I've got a lot of books on psychology, and I've done a lot of research in this area. So, I'm not just making this stuff up. My premise is that human beings have moved too fast. And when we come into the world, the way we're designed and hardwired is to live in the wilderness. I mean, we're hunter-gatherers. It's in our brains. It's in our minds. We're wired that way, to live in small tribes, to live on the plains, to live by campfires at night, to protect each other. Civilization is a new invention. It's only a few thousand years old. In the grand scheme of history of Earth and all of animal life that existed before us, that's not very long. And our brains haven't changed. And that's the source of so much of our anxiety, is the fact that, we assume that, you come into the world and, a child is mostly safe, especially in America. I mean, the parents bring their child home, and the child has a roof over his head. He's got plenty of food. He's got, plenty of love and care, all the things that a child needs to survive. So the child is safe. The child doesn't have to worry about predators or being eaten, by lions or wolves or whatever in the middle of the night, which is what, not that long ago, that's what our ancestors had to worry about. A predator could come, a lion could come and snatch the child away in the middle of the night. But the problem is those children come into the world with those instincts still in place. And the things that we have to do to keep that child to feel safe are very important. I mean, they're more important than anything else. And it's really not that difficult. I mean, the things that a child needs to feel safe and protected in the world are the basic primitive needs that humans have to feel that their parents are paying them a lot of attention. Because if, as a parent, if you're not paying enough attention to your child, it sends a signal into the child's survival instincts that he's at risk to be eaten by predators, because children depend on their parents for protection. And again, That's why children have nighttime terrors. That's why they, they have fears at night that they're going to be eaten by monsters under the bed. Those monsters are a modern imaginary manifestation of these deep-rooted fears of predators at night. That's why children are afraid of the dark. And, the degree to which a child has terrors at night is something you can use to measure how neglected that child is by their parents, how they're not getting the appropriate amount of love and attention, so on and so forth. And so all these survival mechanisms can get really screwed up if the child isn't properly loved after paid enough attention. Affection is very important. It's one of the crucial aspects of survival. If you go back to all mammals, like what we need is to touch each other. Like there's signals in our body that when you're being touched that you feel safe, because it's us coming together, and our odds of survival are better if we can come together. And if we can band together as one. So children need affection. Humans need affection. Adults still need affection. We like affection because it makes us feel safe. It shows us that we're not alone. So the basic things like, psychologically, yes. From a biological standpoint, children need, shelter. They need a roof over their head. They need food and water and milk and all that. But they also need love, and they need affection, and they need, their parents to be actively involved in their lives. And those are so basic, and, it's not rocket science. And yet, we're living in a time where child abuse is an epidemic. Parents who don't pay their children enough attention. And there's a lot of things that we've done in society that we never stepped back and asked, is this a good idea? We just assumed it was a good idea and just went with it. And I'm going to talk about some of those tonight. So we might get a little bit controversial, but I'm not actually trying to anger anyone. Believe me, the world has enough anger at the moment. I'm just, I've got the science and the studies and the statistics and the psychological research to back this up. So I stand on everything that I say, and I'm not trying to anger anyone. I'm just trying to inform people and help us, change the way we think so that we can do better in keeping our children safe and keeping them psychologically happy. So when children are growing, their nervous system isn't developed yet fully. So it's very important. Humans have a longer childhood, in regard to the span of our lives than any other animal. So you get a puppy, and the puppy becomes a full adult dog very quickly. And most of the animal kingdom is like that because it's all about survival. If the calf or the puppy or whatever stays too little for too long, it's easy prey for predators. And so they have to grow up really fast. The humans don't have that. We're different. We stay children for upwards of 12 to 13 years before we start to enter sexual maturity. And that's an extraordinarily long time. But it's also part of the key to our domination. What has made us different than any other creature that's ever lived on Earth. It gives us plenty of time for brain development. But those years are crucial because, the child's nervous system is developing, and they're learning to process the world. Like, how do you process what's safe from what's dangerous? And what abuse does is it hampers the development of the nervous system. So, if you look at the anatomy of our nervous system, from one neuron to the next, each nerve cell, there's a chemical reaction that has to be released, and that chemical is called dopamine. And so in healthy development, the nervous system develops, and then, you need like a healthy 100% level of dopamine flowing from your brain to each nerve in your entire body. So abuse hampers the development, and what it does is, so now the child has a deficient nervous system. So the neurons don't process the proper amount of dopamine. And so as adults, what they do is they do everything they can to get more dopamine, to get that rush. And so they'll turn to things that cause an increase of dopamine, even though those things are always temporary. So there's no replacement for a healthy, normal, stable, loving childhood where they'll have 100% development in their nervous system as adulthood. And the things that they try to replace those with in adulthood are things like drugs and gambling and any addictive behavior. Those behaviors, they increase the dopamine levels, and anything can be an addiction. And there are a lot of addictions that people have. So like, we're going to talk a little bit later about a specific case of someone very famous who got almost no attention from their parents growing up. And as an adult, his addiction was attention. And he did everything he could to get attention. He always had to be the life of the party. He always had to be loud. He always had to be funny. He always had to be, everybody in the world had to notice him at all times. It's his inner child's survival mechanisms coming out and saying, I need attention, I need attention, I need attention. But that attention doesn't last. It's only... so what addictions do, say if you need a 100% normal dopamine level flowing from one neuron to the next, abuse leads in adulthood to say only a 20% dopamine level flows from one neuron to the next. Now, when the person does a drug, if they do whatever that drug is, whether it's real actual drugs, whether it's prescription drugs, whether it's, just getting attention or gambling or alcohol or whatever, it raises the dopamine levels temporarily. And that's the first time they've ever felt somewhat normal. Now, it's not 100%. It's not the functioning, healthy nervous system that humans are intended to have. But it's a temporary fix. But the problem is when that temporary fix wears off, their dopamine levels crash to less than they were before. So they've got to go back to the addiction to feel normal again, to get that hit once again. And unfortunately, this becomes a deadly cycle. And every time they do it, they never get that original high. So the first hit of the drug may have raised their dopamine levels to 80%. And that's the closest to 100% they've ever been. But the next one will only raise it to 75%, and then only 70%, and so on and so forth. So they'll never get that high that they got from the first hit. And that's just the deadly cycle of addiction. And that's what it does to you until it just destroys your life. It destroys your nervous system. It destroys your body. It destroys your health. It destroys your relationships. But we have to get to the source of addictions. And by and large, the vast majority is an abusive childhood in some way, shape, or form, and in capacity. So what I want to do is talk about the different forms of abuse that are the most common, and some of them are kind of obvious, but then there are others that are less obvious, and those are always the ones that are more pervasive in society. So this is where I'm going to start to get controversial, because I know I've got a big Christian audience, and I know we're all pro-spanking, because the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. So let me choose my words carefully. I understand that the Bible says that, and I understand that, spanking and discipline are important because you do have to teach your children rules, boundaries, and limitations. And I know the big problem that people will say, which we'll talk about this a little bit later, is the lack of spanking in children who are completely undisciplined. And I understand that. Children are wilder than ever. When I talk about beating your child, I'm not necessarily talking about spanking them like on the backside. I'm talking about beating them. And there are certain forms of that were very common in the old world that might be considered spanking still to this day, but I think were bad. And one of those is belting. You should not take a belt and strike your children. I don't care if your parents did it and you turned out okay. I don't care if your grandparents did it. I don't care if it was more common in the old world. It's not an improvement. Some changes in society are not necessarily bad. A lot of changes in society are good. And so I really don't think you should strike your children with a belt. And once again, let me disclaim that as a Christian. I'm not coming out against spanking or, the biblical definition of sparing the rod and spoiling the child. But people, unfortunately, have taken that over the years and went with it. And there's certain forms of physical abuse of children that have actually been devastating, that were intended to be forms of punishment. So you should never strike your children anywhere in the face or the back, or, spanking targets their backside. So we'll establish that as a rule or a boundary. So you should never hit your children in the face. You should never punch them. You should never give them a black eye or a bloody lip. You should never hit them on the back with a belt or anything like that. And the damage you're doing to their nervous system, because children are in that development stage. And when you do that, you damage the pain receptors in their bodies. And this can have lifelong consequences. And so in adulthood, they'll have, what it does to children being physically beaten is it teaches them to not feel comfortable in their own skin. It teaches them that their own skin is their enemy. And so in adulthood, they'll never feel safe or feel comfortable in their own skin. And, again, that can have lifelong consequences. So if we go back to my original premise, this is the foundation I'm building my case on. It's in the fact that these forms of anxiety and what they come from is our tribal ancestry. So if you go back to our wilderness days, before civilization was invented, when we still lived in small tribes out in the jungles and in the wilderness, the basic things you needed. As a child, you needed to know that your parents were watching after you, that they were going to keep you safe, that you were safe from predators. But what happens if the parent actually becomes the thing to be afraid of? That really warps a child's mind. So children who live in fear of their parents, don't cross my parents or you'll get beaten. Don't cross dad or he'll hit you or he'll beat you. See, like, in the ideal child's mind, the father and the mother are supposed to be their protectors. The mother is supposed to serve the role of the nurturer, and the father is supposed to serve the role of the protector. And if one of those turns on you and becomes the thing to be afraid of, just think of how that warps a child's mind. A child who comes into the world with all these instincts that are wired to, want to be loved and protected and nurtured by their parents, and then to have that twisted and turned and pulled away from them at a young age and turned on its head. Now their parent is someone to be afraid of. Their parent has become the predator. And so, if I anger my parents, I'll get beaten. I'll get hit in the face. If I say the wrong things to mom and dad, I'll be harmed. I'll be physically harmed. I mean, just think about the devastating lifelong consequences of that. So, yes, I'm pro-spanking, but I caution people not to take that as license to physically abuse, hit, punch, belt, beat in any way, shape, or form. And this has been the source of a lot of anxiety for people over the years. It really has been a difficult thing. And so what happens to a child when they're physically beaten and abused by their parents is that they grow up with an inability to process real danger. Remember, I said this in my anxiety live stream about 2 weeks ago, that what anxiety really is when your body is telling you that you're in danger when you're really not in danger. So let's say, for example, that if you've got obsessive compulsive disorder and you've got somebody who has anxiety and they get down on their hands and knees and they're constantly trying to straighten a rug, got to get all the fringes perfect, the rug has to be perfect, and they'll do it over and over and over again. It's because their mind, their inner survival mechanisms, which, we have it in our brain, but we also have it in our adrenal gland, which is the renal gland right above your kidneys. Your brain is sending signals down to that. And so what that does is your brain is sending signals down to your renal gland, and it stimulates adrenaline so that you can run away from predators, to get out of the way of danger. And so it's a useful survival mechanism. It's good that humans have that. But if it gets messed up, then what can happen is your brain will do that and send those messages, and you'll start getting the adrenaline rush when nothing is really happening. Like, that person with OCD that's straightening that rug, their mind is telling them that they're going to die if they don't straighten the rug. That literally they'll be killed, that they'll be ripped apart by their enemies. Now, they may not be thinking that subconsciously, or consciously, but it's all in the subconscious. It's all in the instincts, And so that's the kind of effects that, and child abuse does that because, the nervous system isn't developed properly. And because, the parents that are supposed to be the protectors and the nurturers have actually become the thing to fear. So as an adult, that child, when they grow up, they're not going to be able to process danger normally. They're not going to know what's a real threat from what isn't a real threat. So if you can imagine an animal that's backed into a corner, they say, a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, because when the animal is, we'll say it's like a raccoon or something. You back a raccoon into the corner, and that's when it's the most dangerous. That's when it gets ferocious, when it's afraid for its life. Like, a raccoon will normally otherwise just try to get away from you, but if you back it into a corner, the teeth will come out and the claws will come out, and it'll start, it's scared. It seems like it's being angry and vicious, but it's scared for its life. It's trying to save itself. It will scratch you. It'll pee on you. It'll bite you. It'll rip you apart. It'll do anything. It's trying to save itself. And you may not even be trying to threaten it, but if you back it into a corner, it's going to interpret that as a threat. So humans who are abused as children will do the same thing. And so they'll have in adulthood anger, hostility, anger management issues, and aggression. And so what that is when you back an animal into a corner, they go into what's called fight or flight mode. They'll fight, they'll scream, they'll pee on themselves, they'll do anything. They'll just try to tear you apart to get away, to save themselves. And so humans, like, they're abused as children. When they reach adulthood, their fight or flight senses are messed up. So all it can take is just a little bit of criticism. So you can say, oh, well, you didn't, do that right. You didn't shovel the walk thoroughly enough. You missed a spot when you cut the grass. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. But they will misinterpret that as a threat to their lives. Like the raccoon, all of a sudden they'll get angry, they'll get hostile, they'll think, it's like their survival mechanisms are telling them that they're in danger, that they're going to die if they don't fight for their own survival. So they'll get vicious, they'll start screaming, they'll start, you criticize me for everything they do. They'll go into violent rages, and then sometimes the physical abuse will start from that. And so if you've ever been in a, domestic violence situation, you may have wondered, like, you've got an abusive husband, anything can set him off. So for example, like if you left the air conditioning running for too long, or if you, you didn't turn the TV off the right way, or whatever it is, it's something stupid, it's something meaningless. You didn't fold their clothes right, whatever it is. It puts them into fight or flight mode because they were abused as a child. They have the inability to process real danger from things that aren't danger, things that pose no threat to them. And they'll start screaming, they'll start punching, they'll start kicking, they'll start doing all these crazy things, because they're basically a scared animal. They're like a raccoon that's been backed into a corner. They're doing all these things to save their lives, or at least that's what their brains are telling them. So that's where you get violent rages. That's where you get anger management issues. That's where you get aggression and hostility. And they may struggle to have normal, healthy relationships with others because they've got such a short temper. That's where short tempers come from. Not being properly loved and being maybe physically abused as a child. And then in adulthood, they'll manifest them. That will manifest itself in, quick temper, anger, hostility, rage, resentment, all of these things. So that's obviously physical beating of children is one of the worst forms of child abuse. But again, that one's a bit obvious. It's a little on the nose. So let's talk about some of the ones that are more pervasive in society. Bullying. Oh my goodness, bullying is... So when I was a kid, not that long ago, bullying wasn't considered a big deal. We never even called it bullying. We called it being picked on. The other kids pick on me at school. And, parents didn't really take it as seriously. It didn't seem back then as they do today. And again, that's a change for the better. I am glad that we have marches against bullying, that there's more awareness. There's been documentaries about it. Because I'm going to tell you, there are studies, there have been a lot of studies, psychological studies, scientific studies, neurological studies that show overwhelmingly bullying is just as damaging to children as being physically abused or sexually abused by an adult. So being bullied at school can hurt and harm and damage a child just as badly as if they were beaten by their parents or sexually molested. It's just as catastrophic. And some people don't believe me when I say that, but there's overwhelming scientific evidence for it. And it's something that we've got to... I would say bullying is very pervasive because the child isn't being abused by their parent, which is a bit obvious, but they're being abused by their classmates. They're being abused by other children. But the problem is children come into the world and they haven't matured, they haven't grown. Children are raw. Children are animalistic. They haven't learned the proper functions of society. And so they're closer to wild animals than adults are. And because of that, when you just leave children together in an unsupervised environment, very often they'll start reverting to cruel animalistic tendencies. And you have what's some could be described as a Lord of the Flies situation, where so children will naturally form structural hierarchies. That's why in school and, even as far back as grade school, you start having the kids who are the most popular versus the kids who are unpopular. They naturally gravitate towards these dominance hierarchies. Humans do that. I've talked about that in previous videos. Humans naturally gravitate towards dominance and typically patriarchal hierarchies that's male dominated. So that's where bullying comes from. And there's something in our, again, it's all about the wiring in our brains. So the way our brains are designed, our instincts, is to promote strong genes and genetic survival and to destroy weaker genes. So, like people who have good looks and have big muscles and are perceived as strong are viewed as more valuable. And our instincts, they're not more valuable, but the way we instinctually look at the world, they're viewed as more valuable because they're perceived to have better genes for reproduction, for handing down into the next generation, which would ensure the survival of the human race. Now, you can argue with me about that on the surface level. You're right, but we're talking about instincts. We're not talking about what's in our conscious minds or what we've learned from years of civilization and law and order and all the things that we're accustomed to. But in our natural instincts, there's still these animalistic tendencies. So children who are perceived to have weaker genes, so if they've got acne, if they're kind of skinny, if they're not very athletic, if they've got glasses, if they've got, big buck teeth or crooked teeth or braces, they're perceived as weak. And so there's a tendency naturally for the strong to victimize the weak. And the reason why, so like if you go back to certain mammals, like when you have a litter of pigs, for example, or a litter of swine, we have that old cliche of the runt of the litter. But that's true. So if there's one that's perceived as being weaker than the others will get to the milk first, and they'll push the runt out of the way. And the runt is actually pushed out of the way to be eaten by the predators, because that will save the life of the stronger of the breed, the litter. The stronger will survive, and then the weaker ones with the weak genes, that we don't want those to continue handing their genes down into the next generation. So they'll push that one out to be eaten, and that can ensure the survival. So the stronger ones with the better genes of the litter can, get all the breast milk and can get all the food and resources, and that will ensure that they survive to adulthood and reproduce. And so it's a survival instinct for the preservation of our species. And that's where bullying comes from. So you put a bunch of kids together and they actually do this naturally. They'll perceive who is the weakest among us. That one needs to be hurt. That one needs to be punched. That one needs to be beaten and kicked and reminded that he's a weakling. And he needs to have his head bashed into the ground and his head slammed into lockers to remind him that he's at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, and only the strong, the popular kids, they're at the top. And it's cruel and it's savage, but honestly, to be brutally honest, children are cruel and savage. They can't help it. They come into the world with those instincts. And over the years, they need to be raised in stable households and be taught to hone those instincts, to put them down, so that we can all, come together and realize, what's good about us all. Like even the ones of us who are perceived to be weaker, that, may have glasses or be ugly or weaklings or have thin wrist or not as strong, but they still do have something to offer to society. But that's getting me off topic. So that's where bullying comes from. And bullying is so pernicious. It's everywhere. It's in the schools. And honestly, because of what I just said, one of the great tragedies, and this is what I experienced in school, and I know I can already tell we have some teachers from schools who are watching right now. So I want to get this out. This is very important. There are teachers who will join in the bullying. It will happen and does happen. And I know because it happened to me. So I was bullied in school, and I can remember, cruel, sadistic gym coaches that actually not only did they not stop the bullying and come in and, rescue me, but they actually joined in on it. And again, there's a reason for that. It's like, even as adults, we still have a little bit of those instincts left over where we're trying to push out the weaker of us and try to promote those who are perceived to have the stronger genes for that reason. And so bullying is everywhere. It's in schools. And, there's something. Now, let me get a little controversial here. One of the things that we've assumed that we never really stop back and ask, is this a good thing, is something called daycare. And so, we live in a society now where the man and the wife both go to work and they tend to drop their kids off at a daycare. And we just assume, well, daycare, it's there, it's good for the kids. Studies have not shown that daycare is good for children. For one thing, children are not old enough to emotionally process being dropped off and, their parents leaving them for long periods of time during the day. But think about the message you're sending to your kids, because you've got a minimum wage paid worker who's got 30 some odd kids that they're trying to look after and is not going to be able to give the child the kind of love, attention, nurturing that a parent would be able to. And so it looks and appears as if daycare is catastrophic, because once again, children are being shoved into an environment where they would naturally gravitate towards a Lord of the Flies situation, where the strongest rise to the top, the weakest rise to the bottom, or sink to the bottom. And then bullying becomes a thing. And, you got this minimum wage paid daycare worker. And it's one of those things where we haven't made parenting the priority that it needs to be. We assume that parenting is not as important as our careers. Now, I hope I'm not, angering women out there who are saying, oh, what are you saying? Women can't work. Women need to just stay at home and, be barefoot and pregnant. I'm not saying that, and I'm not, coming out against, women not being able to pursue careers if they want. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, and this applies for men just as well, we need to stop assuming that what we want in our lives is more important than what's best for our children. And, men need to make sure, I'm going to take men to task as well over, the cliche of men who work too hard, work too long, and ignore their children and don't spend enough time with them. The song, The Cat's in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon. That song is very powerful and is a classic, all these decades later for a reason. So think of it this way about the daycare situation. What if, like, for your anniversary, you said to your wife, honey, I'm too busy working. I've got a job. I've got a career. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire someone to take you out to dinner for our anniversary. And I'm only going to pay them minimum wage, sending the message to her that that's how important your relationship is. I'm going to hire a minimum wage paid employee to just take you out for dinner because I'm too busy. And that may sound pretty extreme, but again, what kind of message are we sending to our children? You're just as important to me as a minimum wage paid worker to look after you and 30 other kids while I go to work and have a career and all that. So we need to really rethink what we're doing to our children by putting them in these situations. And the school system, and again, I know I have some teachers watching right now, the school system overall, and if you're the exception to this, fine, and I applaud you, you're a hero to me. But overall, the public school system has been an embarrassing failure for our children. It's been a complete disaster as far as what it's done to children, putting them in public schools. And, schools get overcrowded. And, the teacher, my hat's off to them, trying to educate children like that. But, there's only so much. I think a part of the problem is children did better when schools and classrooms were smaller. The school system was much better and more effective. Kids' grades were better, scores were better, children thrived better, they were more emotionally developed and socialized with other kids. And so the public school system, and it's a tragedy, as taxpayers, what we spend on schools, on education, the schools should be palaces at this point. They should be paved with gold. But there's so much corruption within the school system, with administrators and all of that, and so the children are sort of left behind, and their grades suffer. They're overcrowded. They bully each other. It's just been a terrible disaster. And I realize, like, if you're in the front lines fighting that battle, my hat's off to you. If you're in the trenches, doing what you can to stop bullying, to stop kids from picking on each other, from doing all these things. And it's worse in inner city areas. Like, obviously, I'm in Salisbury, North Carolina. It's not going to be as bad at a public school here as it's going to be like in, New York City or Chicago or some of the poor areas of that, like that. But, so bullying is a terrible form of child abuse. It's very pernicious. And, so many children are failing in school and they're not doing well. And, what some people may answer is they may say, well, bullying builds character. It, makes a man out of you, or makes you tougher. It gives you obstacles to overcome. And that's kind of the narrative we've sold to children. I was once being bullied in school, and I'm not making this up. This was in, I think, the 5th grade. I told on the kids, they were picking on me, and I went to the teacher, and the teacher got mad at me, and I got sent to the principal's office. And so the kids who were bullying me didn't get in trouble. I did, for being a tattletale. And so I go to the principal's office, and the principal gives me a lecture about, I was picked on as well, but look at where I've come now, and I'm so much stronger, and, it built character out of me. That's all just complete, utter baloney. And that's a devastating, damaging message that we're sending to our children by telling them that. Honestly, we need to get in and we need to take bullying seriously as a form of child abuse. We need to take it as seriously as we take molestation and child predators, which we're going to talk about those in a minute. We need to take that stuff that seriously, and we need to do what we can. We need to punish children who bully others. We've got to show them. We've got to inflict pain and suffering on them to show them that there's consequences for their actions. And we have to step in and save children who are being tormented like that. We've got to. And there's no study, there's no scientific evidence whatsoever, and there have been plenty of studies, psychological studies, neurological studies, that bullying does not make them stronger, that it doesn't give them obstacles to overcome and make them thrive and be a success in adulthood. That's us giving ourselves an excuse to not take action. That's us convincing ourselves to trying to alleviate ourselves of any guilt for not taking enough action. That's all that is. I'm sorry if I got worked up here. I'm passionate about that as a subject. So the problem here is that children they don't know how to process what they're enduring in schools and daycares or wherever they're being bullied at. Now, I want to talk about something else. And again, here I'm going to have to be careful and tread on dangerous ground. Single parenting. So when I say that, I know this is really going to infuriate people, but the rise of single parent households has also been catastrophic and damaging on children. Now, if you're a single mother watching this, look, I get it. Very often it's the guy's fault. If you're a single mother, you can blame the father. It's the father's fault. The father cheated on me, had an affair, left me to raise the child by myself. I understand that. I understand that completely. So I'm not attacking you. I'm attacking the dirtbag that left you, okay? And I realize that there are a lot of exceptions, because when you talk about this subject, people immediately go to exceptions. Well, I was raised in a single-parent household. My stepdad was wonderful. Okay, I understand. There's exceptions. I married a single mother, and I'm like a father to those children. I understand. That's good. That's great. That's wonderful. The problem is the more you inflate the number of single-parent households, the law of averages dictates that won't be the case. And parents divorce too easily nowadays. One of the things, this is a catastrophic effect of the sexual revolution. We taught people back in the 60s that they could have all the sex they wanted without consequences. And then, in recent decades, it's become the norm for couples to live together out of wedlock. So you have unmarried couples having kids left and right. You have parents who get married, they have children, then they divorce. And the more this has happened, the more it's led to abuse of children. And there's a biological reason for that I want to get into. And it's, again, if we go back to using other mammals in the animal kingdom as an example. So with lions, when you have a male lion and he's got the female pregnant and they have a litter of cubs together, if that lion, the male lion, the patriarch, if he dies, if he's killed by a rival or whatever, the rival lion comes in and he wants to mate with the mother. and have cubs of his own. So what he will do immediately is he will kill the other lion's cubs. And you'd think, the mother lion, the lioness, would be aggressive and defensive of her children or whatever. But in this situation, she's not. She actually lets the other male lion kill and sometimes even eat her cubs because she knows that now she's going to get to reproduce with this new lion and have more cubs. And so, and that's terrible. I mean, the animal kingdom is a brutal place. This happens with gorillas too. One gorilla will actually bash the heads in of his rivals, the babies of his rival, to be the silverback or the leader of the tribe or whatever. And it's brutal, brutal things. But there's a lot of instincts that we have that are geared towards that. And so let's say you have a single mother and, the father, they divorced or the father left her or whatever. And so now she's got, the kids. First of all, the disastrous thing to do is to take in a live-in boyfriend. Now, it's a bit of a different scenario if she waits and she, dates another guy and gets to know him for several years in advance and then gets married and that becomes a good stepdad to the children. So that's the ideal situation in this case. But what happens all too often, with people shacking up and living together out of wedlock is that she'll bring a boyfriend into the house to live with her with those children. And unfortunately, humans have the same instincts that the gorillas and the lions do. So this, boyfriend that's living with her is there just like the male lion is with the lioness. He's there in the household to have sex with the mother. He's there to reproduce, and he's there to promote his own genes. Sex is about reproduction. I know we like to forget that. Sex isn't about feeling good. It's a brutal force that's billions of years old, and it's for reproduction, for having babies, for spreading our genes into the next generation. And so he's there to do that. And there's a reason why. If you've ever noticed this, like other people's kids are always more irritating than your kids. So when you're out in public and you hear someone else's kids crying, loud, and you just sort of make a face like, boy, if that was my kids, I'd really beat their butts or whatever. Other people's children are more irritating than your own children. So your own children, you're not as likely to do that. That's our instincts. That's Mother Nature at work in us. And this isn't what's happening when a boyfriend is now living in the house with the children. Because the children are crying. They're going to mommy, and mommy's got to pay them attention and meet their needs and say, the kids come in, Mommy, I'm hungry. Mommy, I need my diaper changed or whatever. The mother's there, but the boyfriend, he's there. That's irritation to him. That's getting in his way. It's like it's getting in his way to reproduce with the mother. And so he'll start beating those children. He'll start slapping them. He'll start screaming at them. They're irritating to him. They're getting in his way. And in some cases, he will sexually abuse them. And I'm telling you, the more single parent households we have, the more that's going to happen. And so there have been statistical studies that show children of single parent households, and this also is true for single dads, by the way. I'm not singling out, pun unintended, single mothers, but in single father households, this is a problem too, where the new girlfriend that he brings in to live with him and the children sometimes will actually sexually abuse and molest his sons. I mean, that happens way more often than we want to talk about or that people like to think about. So this leads us into, those children of single parent households are many times statistically more likely to be sexually abused or physically abused by an adult. And that's going to lead me now into the next subject, which is the sexual abuse of children. And, thank God I wasn't sexually abused, but it's so devastating. It warps the child. Like, I really do think being physically abused is probably not as bad as being sexually abused. And as a society in America, we are tiptoeing so close to the normalization of it. Like, you have these things like Transgender Story Hour, where you've got a transgender person coming in and performing lewd dances in front of children, and we are this close. It scares me because that is the most heinous thing that we do as a species, is sexually abusing children. Now, I want to say, too, that there's a lot of statistics about the need for fathers, and when you have children that grow up without fathers, it can be so devastating. Like, for example, you've probably heard the studies that children who grow up without fathers are so many times more likely to do drugs or be in prison or commit crimes or whatever. It's also true that children who grow up without a father are infinitely more likely to be sexually abused by an adult. That's also true if they grow up without a mother. It's just that, growing up without a father is a little more common than growing up without a mother nowadays. So what sexual predators do is they're like hunters. They have predatory instincts towards which children are easier targets than others. And if you have a child who's being neglected by his parents in any way, and it's not necessarily because it's a single parent household, though that's in most cases that's the case, but it could be they have parents that are married that just ignore them or avoid them or whatever. If you don't pay enough attention to your children, then they're starving for attention from an adult. Those make easier targets. They also have a distrust of adults and authority figures. So those children are way less likely to go tell on the predator. So pedophiles tend to zero in on children who, and it's amazing how they do this, is that they tend to be naturally good at picking out from a group of children which is the one who isn't loved by their parents, who's, the product of divorce, who is being beaten or abused or otherwise. So that child, if they go to a child that is in a loving, stable two-parent household and has never been beaten and has good grades at school or whatever, that child is not going to trust them because the child's not starving for attention from an adult. That child is way more likely to go tell to the authorities, to go tell their parents or whatever. So the pedophile zeroes in on the child who is ignored, abused, or whatever by their parents. Such an easier target. And I tell you, we have these nightmare scenarios that we talk about children being abducted by strangers on the side of the road in vans and all that. And that does happen, but I'm going to tell you, 99% of all sexual abuse cases happen from someone the family trusts. It's a neighbor, it's an uncle or a aunt, it's a relative, it's a friend of the family, whatever. Those people are way more likely to weasel their way into your household and zero in on your child if that child is starved of love and attention. And so they can use things to lure children in. And I'll tell you, this is actually a fascinating thing to study, like how sexual predators lure children in. And, the cliche we use is you got the stranger in the van and he says, help me find my puppy. Like he uses a puppy, or maybe he uses candy. He hands out candy or whatever. And he does that to try to lure children in. It's a promise of something children like. Children like candy. Children like puppies. Children like bright colors. They like ice cream. They like sweets. They like these things that get them excited. And the predator will use those things to lure children in. And there's so many different cases of things like that that you've probably never even thought about. So, for example, some of the bigger cases, the more high-profile cases. Now, there's a lot of people that maintain Michael Jackson is innocent. I've seen the documentary Finding Neverland, or Escaping Neverland, whatever it was called, and it was just horrific to hear. I don't know if Michael Jackson's guilty or innocent. There are so many people out there who claim that he was innocent, so many people who claim he was guilty. What I'm saying is that if he's guilty, what he did is a classic pedophile pattern, because Neverland Ranch is a place any kid would love to visit. I mean, come on. Like, you've got Disney characters, people in Disney costumes everywhere. You've got roller coasters and a zoo in your backyard. You've got this big house with all these childish things, all these cartoon characters everywhere. It's like a child's wonderland. So, children who are fans of Michael Jackson, I mean, Michael Jackson's just got this unbelievable amount of fame, unprecedented amount of wealth. And so parents will naturally trust somebody who's got that kind of fame, and children will just be enraptured by that fame. Like, wow, I'm going to get a chance to meet Michael Jackson, to visit Neverland Ranch. My dreams are coming true. And so you take a child into a situation like that, you lure them in, and they're surrounded by things that children like, animals and, clowns and Disney characters and all these things, but it's a trap. It's just like the stranger handing out lollipops or, help me find my puppy. It's luring those children in. And the parents felt perfectly safe. Look how big this mansion is, like there's security guards everywhere. My child is perfectly safe if I leave them alone and let them spend the night here. And, now that the parents have been isolated and separated, there's an opportunity to lure the children into the bedroom. And, it's a big bedroom at first. And that's how it happened. It was a step-by-step process. Now, again, whether or not Michael Jackson's guilty or innocent, that is a classic way. I mean, that is so instructive. Every way that a pedophile will lure children in to sexually abuse them. That's how it's done. A recent example, though, too, another high-profile case that's more relevant in the news is the Jeffrey Epstein story, which is just such a bizarre story. But so this guy was kind of a con artist, and he was a swindler, and he became a billionaire by scamming people on Wall Street. And with that billions, he built all these mansions. But see, there's something very important you have to understand. He built his billion-dollar mansion in Palm Beach County, Florida, which is right next to another part of Florida where there's a lot of poverty. So on one side you have, and there was actually a bridge separating Palm Beach from West Palm Beach. So on one side you've got billionaires and all these beautiful mansions and the most gorgeous, pristine beaches in the world. On the other side you've got a poor neighborhood where there's, a lot of ghettos and a lot of poor housing, and that's been a breeding ground for young girls who, are pretty, but they're in school and they're products of divorce and their dads aren't around, and, they've been abused by their parents and they've got low self-esteems. And those girls, it was intentional. Like, Jeffrey Epstein built his mansion there on purpose, and he would send a cab over and they'd go through the neighborhoods and just find these young, 13, 14-year-old girls from these rough neighborhoods and say, I'll give you a ticket out. Get in the cab with me. We'll go over, and there's a eccentric billionaire who wants to give you a job. And, so the girls who their whole lives have lived in this poor neighborhoods and never experienced anything like this before, they get in a limousine and they get to go to this beautiful place with all of these gorgeous beaches, and there's, this big, beautiful mansion, and it's like nothing they've ever seen. They never experienced that kind of wealth, but it's a trap. It was a trap to lure them in. And once he was able to lure them in, he was able to sexually abuse them, sell them into prostitution, sell them to his rich business friends. My God, it was terrible. It was just absolutely horrible. And then, of course, we know about Jeffrey Epstein's private island where, child prostitution. He was having girls flown in from around the world, but it all started in Palm Beach. His ring of underage child prostitutes started in Palm Beach in Florida, and that was the scenario that he had set up. So you see this pattern over and over again. You saw it or something like it with Michael Jackson, with Jeffrey Epstein, but it happens, down to the lower levels too, where, children who are not properly loved by their parents are just such easy targets for being molested. And so the lesson there, what is the best way to protect your children from being sexually abused? We think it's lock your doors at night or keep an eye on them at all times or whatever. But the actual answer is to love them. Love your children. Spend lots of time with them. You can't, no amount of security you spend will ever be a substitute for that. Because if you love your children and nurture them and hold them and are affectionate towards them and, build their self-esteem and lift them up, the basic things that a parent should do, the most important things in parenting, if you do that, you will put an invisible force field around your children to protect them from sexual predators. I guarantee it. Predators are way less likely to zero in on your child. They can tell just by looking at the child, that's not a good target. I promise you. All right, so another form of abuse, and then that gets us into the next one, which is ignoring children. So again, I didn't mean to attack single parent households because I know how common they are. But if you don't pay your children attention, that can be just as devastating. Because remember what I said at the beginning, that when children are in this, their instincts are back in the wilderness before civilization. Their instincts in their minds, the way their brains are wired is mom and dad are there to protect me from the wild, from predators, from thirst, from famine, from all these things. So you can give your children everything monetarily in the world. You can give them all the food, all the shelter, all the clothing, anything they could ever have. But if you don't pay them attention, they're still going to feel like their lives are in danger. So their internal instincts are crying out for attention. And so the person that I referenced earlier, the famous person, was Robin Williams. So Robin Williams was an only child. He grew up in a household with two wealthy parents, and his dad was a total stuffed shirt. His dad was a wealthy banker or something like that. It was a beautiful multi-million-dollar mansion, and he was totally alone. He almost never saw his dad. His father was always going away on business trips. His mother hired an assistant to watch over him. So his mother was this wealthy socialite snob woman that went off and would spend thousands of dollars getting her hair and makeup and nails done. And so poor little Robin, this child, in this big, gorgeous mansion, it was like a castle. It was like totally isolated and alone. And he had caretakers that watched over him or whatever. But Robin Williams was starved for attention as a child. And he felt so unloved by his parents. And that's why he was the person he was. That's why in adulthood, he was this wild, crazy, funny, silly guy, very good at humor. He spent a lot of time alone in that mansion growing up as a child. He spent a lot of time practicing his acting, practicing his accents, so that's why he was so good at it as an adult. But, his comedic timing and all that, it all stems from a need for attention. He was constantly yearning for attention. Like I said earlier, the need for attention is like a drug, just as much as actual drugs are. So if you have a child who's starving for attention, they will do it constantly as an adult. Anything they can to be attention. They'll be loud, they'll be silly, they'll enter into a room, they'll go into a restaurant, whatever, they'll be crazy, they'll be wild, they'll do everything they can to get noticed because they feel uncomfortable. They feel like they're going to die if they're not the center of attention. They'll do anything they can to themselves be the center of attention. But the problem is that attention isn't really fixing the problem. It's like it's the drug, it's the dopamine rush. They get a dopamine rush when people are noticing them and paying attention, when all eyes are on them. But when they leave the situation, their nervous system once again crashes, their dopamine levels go back down, and they're not happy. They still haven't fixed the pain of their childhood. So psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are more effective methods at treating anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive behavior than the drug that they use to try to self-medicate. It's been said that ignoring your children, never telling them that you love them, never being involved in their lives is actually worse. It's worse than beating them and hating them and screaming at them and cussing at them. Because children who have physically or verbally or emotionally abusive parents who beat them and cuss at them and tell them they're worthless and do all those things, that child has a line in the sand. That child has something to react to, something to fight against. But, children who grow up with parents who are like ghosts, who are lonely and sad, and their parents never tell them they love them, but their parents might love them. They're left with that mystery of, do my parents love me or not? That's actually more harmful than the child who's beaten, abused, cussed at, or whatever. So ignoring your children is possibly one of the worst things you can ever do to them. All right, but then there is a flip side to that. So on the other end is helicopter parenting, which is kind of becoming the big epidemic of modern times. So we have so many children who are undisciplined. They're never taught rules, boundaries, or limitations. But at the same time, we helicopter parent too much. We watch the news and we see all these stories of pedophiles who are out there to kidnap your children and snatch them up and put them in a van, and you'll never see them again, and maybe they'll find their body 10 years from now. And those instances are statistically very rare. The news makes it look like it happens all the time, but it really is not likely to happen. So But because of that, we live in a real fear-based society. We're terrified of letting our children out of our sight. So we surveil them. We make our children feel like they're under surveillance 24/7. And it has also been shown statistically that children who actually are hovered over by their parents actually end up with just as much depression as if they had been sexually abused or molested. Now, if you tell a helicopter parent that, prepare to have your face ripped off, because I know people are very defensive about how they raise their children nowadays, but this is something that we need to keep in mind. Like, there is actually a school, I forgot where it was at. I need to brush up on this case again. School was doing terrible. It was underfunded. Kids were doing awful. Kids had all bad grades. ADD levels were through the roof. Autism levels were through the roof. Just, all these mental problems the kids had. Their grades were in the toilet. It was one of the worst performing schools in the state. And the school did a radical experiment. Very, very radical. They actually, because what most schools do is they think, well, we're not teaching the kids enough, so we need to give them more homework. We need to give them, more time at school, stricter teachers, and those actually have the reverse effect. So what they did was they actually gave the kids more playtime. They actually increased the amount of recess. They doubled it. And what they also did, and, some parents will cringe hearing that, they actually let go of supervision. So the teachers actually would leave the kids outside with nobody watching. Now, it was a fenced-in area, so people couldn't just climb the security fence. But no adult supervision and unsupervised play time for twice the amount. I don't know how they got the parents to agree to that. But the results of the experiment were interesting. Grades went up. ADD levels went down. Kids started paying more attention in school. Kids started learning more. Every possible benefit you can imagine skyrocketed. And you think, well, those kids are out there playing, someone's going to get hurt. Actually, accident rates went down. Less children were getting physically hurt. There was less broken bones, less trips. It was amazing. It was truly amazing. So we do have to give our kids a break. There used to be a day and time where you could let your kids play outside and run around and all that. And back in the day, kids went out in the woods by themselves and, ran around barefoot and things like that. And, back in my grandfather's time, I can remember stories like that. It's like, you won't find very many parents who will do that nowadays. But there's something to think about. Kids statistically may be safer if they go out in the woods and play unsupervised for a while, as long as they don't get lost. But yeah, and another important thing to bring out of this is, children need play. We think that playtime is bad for kids. Kids are playing too much. Actually, playtime, especially outdoor playtime, recess, playing on playgrounds, running around, jumping, that is so good for children. The health benefits of that, not just from the exercise, but the mental benefits. Grades went up. Kids were emotionally and more mature. They were mentally sharper from added playtime. So playtime is intrinsically beneficial to children. Kids need to play. They need to play a lot. And that gets me into another thing that I worry about is, this generation of kids that are on their cell phones, that are on electronic gadgets and tablets playing games all the time and being isolated from others when, there's really no replacement to a healthy amount of children and other children in a natural outdoor environment on a playground, running around and playing and just having a good time, just what that does for them. And it is interesting that more playtime actually made them pay better attention at school and get better grades. So more homework and more schoolwork actually has the reverse effect. So that brings me near the end. So really the basic thing is, I think what's really wrong with society, this is the most important thing, talking about child abuse and what we can do to correct it and lessen it as a society. Children are the future, and children are going to grow up to be adults, and we have to remember, these are the things that we need to do to keep the human race going, to keep have our children excel in the future, to do great things and go great places. These are the basic things we need. We need to not just give them all the material wants that they can ever have, but we need to love them. We need to pay them a lot of attention. We need to tell them that we love them. We need to say, I love you to them. And they need to grow up in stable 2-parent households. Now, I understand, widow situations. I understand, sometimes the stepdad is better than the original dad. I get it. I get it. It's just, I'm talking about what's biologically, naturally best for children. And if we can do that, if we can do a better job of that, part of our problem is parents are unbelievably selfish nowadays. This is a me generation. And you can go back to the early 1900s to see why. There's an influential philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche, and Nietzsche was very self-oriented, and he was the first person to say you can be whatever you want to be, but he didn't mean that in a good way. With what we have, if you're a man, you can be a woman. If you're a woman, you can be a man if you want to. You're whatever you think you are. That's Nietzschean philosophy on steroids. But unfortunately, the mindset we have with feminism, with, corporatism, with, honestly, I don't want to use the word capitalism, but people who are so career-oriented and that going out of control, where all they care about is money and wealth and fame and status and resources. It goes for men as well as for women. All these tragedies, we've taught people that these are the most important things in life. Your career is the most important thing in your life. Your job is the most important thing. The amount of money you make is the most important thing. And that's the lie of feminism as well, is that feminism has taught women that that's the most important thing. And I know what you're going to say. Oh, you're saying women shouldn't work. They should be home barefoot and pregnant. No, I'm not saying that. Women can work if they want to. I'm pro women's rights. I just think we need to, men didn't learn the lesson. Men have never learned the lesson that the amount of cars they drive, the amount of wealth they have, their status, resources isn't the key to happiness. And feminism tells women that it's the key to happiness, and that men are keeping something from them. And the key to happiness, to be honest with you, this goes for men as well as for women, is to have a loving family. The time and investment you put in your children is so much more important than the time and investment you put in your job, your career, your pay raise, the amount of money you're going to make in the future. I mean, those things are important, but they're not as important as lots of time with your children. So children are the future. When you have children, you're the past. When you have children, their needs come first, your needs come last. And unfortunately, we have the mindset nowadays that when we have children, our needs still come first, but now we've got this child who, they've got needs too, I guess, and we put those on the back burner and make them of secondary importance. So I'm going to stop right there. We've been going on for a pretty long time. This is the longest live stream I've done so far. I think we're pushing an hour and a half now. But it's just, I think it's the most important one I've done. So thank you all for watching who have stayed with me. I'm still going to keep doing more. I've got more ideas for future mental health topics, things that I can do to contribute with studies of psychology and psychological research to just try to make people's lives better, to fight anxiety, to fight depression, mental illness, all the things that are pervasive in society. So thank you all for watching. I try to do these on Saturdays. I was too busy yesterday, so I did it today. But maybe this Saturday I'll have another topic coming up. On my profile page, you can find all the other live streams I've done in the past. This is the third one I've done on mental health. I've done some Bible studies, too. I taught the class on Galatians since we were out of Sunday school during quarantine for a while. Those are all still there as well. I've got a YouTube channel. I haven't put anything on it in a while, but I might start saving these videos and putting them on YouTube as well for people who can't access it on Facebook for whatever reason. So God bless you all. I'll see you all later.